There are moments in life when everything familiar begins to shake. Doors close without explanation. Relationships change. Plans collapse. Prayers seem unanswered. And in those moments, we are tempted to believe that something has gone wrong. But I stand here today to tell you a life-changing truth. Sometimes what feels like loss is actually preparation. Sometimes what feels like an ending is the very place where God begins again. Throughout history, God has always worked through seasons of resetting. He does not waste pain. He does not abandon His people. And He never dismantles a life without a greater purpose in mind. When God resets a life, it is not to destroy it. It is to rebuild it on a stronger foundation. Right now, some of you feel like you've been stripped down to nothing. The confidence you once had is gone. The direction you thought was clear now feels confusing. You're asking, why am I here? Why did this happen? But what if this shaking is not punishment? What if it is positioning? What if God is clearing space for something greater than you could ever imagine? A reset is uncomfortable because it forces us to let go of control. We cling to what we know, even when it no longer serves God's purpose for us. But God, in His mercy, will sometimes remove what we refuse to release, not because He is cruel, but because He sees what we cannot see. He sees the future we are not ready for yet. When God resets your life, often starts by realigning your heart. He brings you to a place of humility where you no longer rely on your strength, your plans, or your abilities. In that place, prayer becomes real again. Faith becomes desperate again. Dependence on God becomes daily, not occasional. And it is there, on your knees, that true transformation begins. Many people miss their miracle because they resist the reset. They fight the process. They beg God to restore what He has already decided to replace. But God is not interested in recycling old seasons when He has already planned new ones. He is preparing you for greater responsibility, deeper faith, and wider impact. And preparation often looks like isolation, silence, and waiting. Do not be afraid of the waiting. Waiting is not wasted time when God is involved. In the waiting, God strengthens your character. He teaches you obedience when answers are delayed. He builds endurance when results are unseen. What you are becoming in this season matters more than what you are receiving. Every great move of God begins with surrender. When you finally say, Lord, not my will, but yours, the reset shifts from painful to purposeful. You begin to see that God is not taking things away to leave you empty. He is making room. Room for peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Room for faith that doesn't collapse under pressure. Room for a calling that is bigger than comfort. And hear this clearly, what God is preparing will require a new version of you. The old mindset cannot sustain the new blessing. The old habits cannot support the new assignment. The old fears cannot survive where God is taking you. That is why the reset feels so intense. God is upgrading your spiritual capacity. There are moments in life when loss feels overwhelming, when what once defined your sense of stability suddenly disappears. A job ends, a relationship breaks, a door you prayed would open shuts without warning. In those moments, the human heart instinctively interprets loss as failure or rejection. We assume something has gone wrong, that we have been forgotten or pushed aside. But in the economy of God, loss is often not an ending at all, preparation disguised as pain. God has always worked through subtraction before addition. He removes before he rebuilds, empties before he fills. What looks like loss to us is often God loosening our grip on what we have outgrown. We cling tightly to familiar things because they provide comfort, even when they quietly limit our growth. God sees beyond our attachment. He knows when something that once helped us has begun to hinder us. And because He loves us too much to leave us confined, allows it to be removed. Loss strips away illusions. It reveals what we truly trust in. When everything is going well, faith can become casual. Prayer becomes polite. Dependence on God becomes optional. But when something precious is taken away, faith is no longer theoretical. It becomes desperate and honest. In that raw place, God does His deepest work. Not interested in surface level belief. He is shaping hearts that trust Him even when nothing makes sense. Many people pray for greater purpose, but resist the process that leads to it. They want promotion without pruning, blessing without breaking, impact without transformation. Yet preparation often comes through discomfort. God prepares His people not by making life easier, but by making them stronger. Loss exposes weakness so strength can be built. It humbles pride so character can be formed. Teaches obedience when control is gone. What feels like loss also redirects vision. When one path closes, it forces you to lift your eyes and look elsewhere. Had that door remained open, you might never have discovered the calling waiting beyond it. God is not limited by closed doors. He uses them. Sometimes He closes a door not because you were wrong, but because you were ready for something more aligned with His purpose. The pain of losing one direction is often the push needed to step into another. Loss also creates space. A life crowded with the wrong things has no room for the right ones. God will never pour new wine into old containers. He is preparing to give you something greater, something deeper, something eternal. He must first make room. That room is often created through removal. What leaves your life now may be making space for peace you've never known, faith you've never exercised, and purpose you've never imagined. There is also a refining power in loss. It burns away what is temporary and reveals what is eternal. When everything else falls apart, what remains becomes clear. You begin to see that your identity was never meant to rest in success, approval, or security. It was meant to rest in God alone. That realization does not come easily. It often comes through tears, questions, and long nights of silence. But once it comes, changes everything. God never wastes loss. Not a single tear is ignored. Not a single prayer whispered in brokenness goes unheard. Even when you cannot trace His hand, His work is still unfolding. He is arranging circumstances, aligning timing, and shaping you for what is next. What feels like chaos is often divine order you do not yet recognize. The danger is misinterpreting loss as abandonment. When people believe God has left them, they retreat into bitterness, fear, or hopelessness. They stop expecting good. They lower their faith to match their pain. But God is closest in seasons that feel most empty, is working quietly, deeply, intentionally. Preparation rarely feels holy while it is happening. It feels confusing. It feels lonely. It feels unfair. But later, clarity comes. What you lose in one season often becomes the foundation for what you carry into the next. The wisdom gained through disappointment, the compassion born from suffering, the humility shaped by failure, these are not accidents. They are tools God uses to prepare you for greater responsibility. The weight of future blessing requires present strengthening. So when loss enters your life, do not rush to escape it or deny it. Allow God to speak through it. Ask what He is teaching, not just what He is taking. Trust that He knows what He is doing even when you do not. What feels like loss today may one day be the very reason you stand stronger, wiser, and more grounded in faith. God is not removing things to harm you. He is preparing you for something you are not yet ready to receive. When God begins a reset, the first place He touches is not your circumstances, but your heart. People often look for change on the outside, new opportunities, restored relationships, visible breakthroughs, but God works from the inside out. He understands that if the heart is misaligned, no blessing will ever bring lasting peace. That is why seasons of resetting often feel deeply personal and spiritually intense. God is drawing your heart back into alignment with Him because everything flows from that center. In busy seasons of life, it is easy for faith to become routine. Prayers are spoken but not always felt. Worship becomes familiar rather than fervent. Trust becomes conditional, dependent on whether life is going well. A reset interrupts that pattern. It slows you down, removes distractions. It brings you face to face with questions you may have avoided for years. In that quiet place, God reveals what truly has your loyalty, your affection, and your dependence. Realignment is rarely comfortable. It requires honesty. God exposes attitudes, motives, and priorities that do not reflect His will. Pride that once hid behind success is revealed. Fear that once hid behind business comes to the surface. Control that once felt like responsibility is shown for what it truly is. None of this exposure is meant to shame you. It is meant to heal you. God cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. As the heart is realigned, faith is strengthened. Not the shallow kind of faith that only believes when evidence is visible, but a deep, resilient faith that stands firm in uncertainty. This kind of faith is built in moments when prayers seem unanswered and clarity is delayed. Grows when you choose trust over understanding and obedience over comfort. Each time you rely on God instead of your own logic, faith takes deeper root. Strengthened faith does not mean the absence of doubt. It means learning how to bring doubt to God instead of letting it drive you away from Him. In a reset season, you learn that faith is not pretending everything is fine. It is believing that God is faithful even when everything feels unstable. That belief changes how you respond to adversity. Instead of panic, there is prayer. Instead of despair, there is hope. Instead of bitterness, there is surrender. God also uses realignment to reshape desires. What once mattered most may begin to lose its grip. Goals that once consumed you may no longer satisfy you. This is not because ambition is wrong, but because God is refining your vision, is teaching you to desire what aligns with His purpose rather than what merely feeds the ego or fills a temporary void. When the heart changes, the direction of life naturally follows. As faith strengthens, obedience deepens. You begin to trust God not only with outcomes, but with process. You stop demanding immediate answers and start valuing divine timing. You learn that delayed fulfillment does not mean denied promise. Obedience in uncertainty becomes an act of worship. Each step taken without full clarity becomes a declaration of trust. This kind of obedience prepares you for greater responsibility. God entrusts more to those who trust Him fully. Realignment also restores intimacy with God. In the noise of success or routine, intimacy can fade without being noticed. A reset brings you back to simple dependence. Prayer becomes conversation, not obligation. Scripture becomes nourishment, not just reference. Worship becomes refuge, not performance. In that restored closeness, strength is renewed. Not strength that comes from confidence in self, but strength that comes from confidence in God. Many people fear realignment because it requires letting go of control. But true faith is not built on control, it is built on surrender. When the heart is aligned with God, peace becomes possible even when circumstances remain uncertain. You learn that stability does not come from having everything figured out, but from knowing the one who holds everything together. A reset that realigns the heart and strengthens faith is one of God's greatest gifts. Prepares you to carry blessings without being destroyed by them, and to walk through trials without losing hope. When God finishes this work, you are no longer driven by fear or circumstance. You are anchored in trust, guided by purpose, and sustained by a faith that has been tested and made strong. When God initiates a reset, resistance is often the first human response. The heart clings to familiarity, even when familiarity has become a cage. People beg for restoration of what God is clearly trying to remove, not realizing that resistance does not stop God's plan, but it can slow their participation in it. The greater purpose is never canceled, but unnecessary struggle is often created when surrender is delayed. Resistance usually comes from fear of the unknown, fear of starting over, fear of losing identity that was tied to people, positions, or past success. The mind says it is safer to hold on to what is known, even if it no longer brings life. But God does not operate on comfort, He operates on calling. When fear dictates decisions, growth is postponed. God will patiently wait, but the longer resistance continues, the longer confusion and frustration remain. Many people confuse resistance with faithfulness. They assume that holding on tightly proves loyalty or perseverance. But there is a difference between faithfulness and stubbornness. Faithfulness follows God even when direction changes. Stubbornness demands that God bless a direction He has already declared finished. True faith is not insisting on your plan, it is trusting God enough to release it. When resistance sets in, spiritual sensitivity dulls. The voice of God becomes harder to hear, not because He has stopped speaking, but because the heart is closed. People become selective listeners, embracing words that comfort them and ignoring those that challenge them. Selective obedience creates delay. God does not reveal the next step to someone unwilling to release the last one. Clarity follows surrender, not resistance. Resistance also produces unnecessary pain. A season meant to be brief becomes prolonged. Lessons that could have been learned quickly are repeated again and again. God is not punishing. He is persistent. He continues to apply pressure until the heart yields, not to break the person, but to free them. The struggle intensifies not because God is cruel, but because resistance creates friction with divine purpose. Letting go is not easy because release feels like loss of control. Control provides an illusion of safety, but God never asks for control to take something away without offering something better. What He offers is guidance, peace, and alignment with a purpose that surpasses human understanding. Resistance delays the moment when peace replaces anxiety and trust replaces fear. There is also a cost to resistance that affects others. When one person delays obedience, it can delay impact. Lives meant to be influenced, helped, or encouraged remain untouched. God's plan is bigger than personal comfort. The reset is not only about personal transformation, it is about preparation for service. Delaying surrender delays usefulness. Resistance often hides behind logic. People rationalize staying where they are because it makes sense financially, emotionally, or socially. But God's purposes are not always logical. Faith requires movement without full explanation. Resistance demands explanation before obedience. Difference determines whether someone moves forward or remains stuck. The moment surrender happens, the shift is immediate. The burden lifts, direction becomes clearer, peace settles in even if circumstances have not yet changed. Peace is confirmation that alignment has been restored. God responds to surrender not with condemnation, but with reassurance. He meets yielded hearts with guidance and strength. Delaying surrender does not mean God has abandoned you. It means He is waiting for your yes. He does not force obedience. He invites it. But every invitation carries urgency. The greater purpose is ahead, not behind. Holding on to what God has asked you to release only anchors you to a season that has already expired. When resistance ends, progress begins. The reset moves from painful to purposeful. God begins to reveal what could not be shown before because the heart was not ready. Surrender opens the door to acceleration. What was delayed can now unfold quickly because alignment has been restored. God never delays for entertainment. Every moment of waiting caused by resistance is an opportunity for learning, but it is not where you are meant to remain. Letting go is the gateway to what is next. Obedience, even when it feels risky, always leads to fulfillment. The greater purpose does not require your control, only your trust. Waiting is one of the most misunderstood seasons in a person's spiritual journey. Many assume that if nothing visible is happening, nothing meaningful is taking place. The silence feels like neglect, the delay feels like denial, and the stillness feels like stagnation. But in God's design, waiting is never empty. It is an active season where the deepest work is happening beneath the surface, shaping character and forming calling long before results appear. In waiting seasons, God shifts the focus from achievement to formation. When progress is visible, it is easy to confuse movement with maturity. But waiting removes that illusion. It exposes impatience, reveals hidden motives, and tests commitment. Without the distraction of success or applause, the heart is examined. God is not preparing you for a moment. He is preparing you for a lifetime. That kind of preparation cannot be rushed. Character is forged when obedience continues without immediate reward. Anyone can remain faithful when prayers are answered quickly. But faith that endures delay is faith that has depth. In waiting, you learn consistency without excitement, discipline without recognition, and trust without evidence. These qualities cannot be developed in fast seasons. They are cultivated slowly through repetition, endurance, and quiet obedience. Waiting also teaches restraint. Not every opportunity is a calling, and not every open door is God's door. In the waiting, discernment grows. You learn to say no without guilt and yes without fear. God sharpens your ability to hear His voice, distinguishing it from impulse, pressure, or emotion. This discernment is critical for the calling ahead. Greater responsibility requires clearer judgment. Calling itself is often shaped in obscurity. While waiting, God refines vision. He clarifies purpose. He removes selfish ambition and replaces it with servant-hearted desire. What once was about personal success becomes about impact. Waiting humbles the heart so the calling can be carried without pride. Without this humility, influence would destroy rather than bless. Waiting seasons also build endurance. Quick success produces shallow roots, but endurance grows when faith is tested over time. When disappointment comes and hope remains, resilience is formed. This resilience is what sustains you when the calling becomes heavy and the assignment becomes demanding. God prepares you not just to receive the calling, but to survive it. Many people underestimate how much strength is developed in stillness. Waiting teaches you to draw strength from God rather than from results. When affirmation is absent and progress is unseen, reliance shifts. You learn to find peace without validation and joy without accomplishment. This internal stability becomes an anchor in future storms. In waiting, God also aligns timing. He works on you while simultaneously arranging circumstances, people, and opportunities. What feels like delay is often divine coordination. If the calling were released too early, it would collide with unprepared hearts, immature character, or misaligned environments. God's timing protects both the calling and the person carrying it. Waiting seasons often feel lonely, but they are not wasted. Isolation creates intimacy. In the quiet, God speaks with clarity that noise would drown out. Prayer becomes deeper, listening becomes sharper, and faith becomes personal. Intimacy strengthens confidence, not in self, but in God's guidance. Character and calling must grow together. Calling without character leads to collapse. Character without calling leads to frustration. Waiting allows both to develop in harmony. God ensures that when the calling emerges, the character can sustain it. The greatest transformations rarely happen in public view. They happen in unseen places where faith is refined and motives are purified. Waiting is not punishment. It is preparation. Those who endure waiting with trust emerge with strength that cannot be shaken and purpose that cannot be taken away. Season will not last forever. God is faithful to complete what He begins. But what is built during the waiting will remain long after the waiting ends. What you become in this season will determine how you walk in the next. Waiting is not the absence of movement. It is the shaping of destiny. When God resets a life, it is never about leaving a person empty or stripped without purpose. It is about creating space. Space in the heart, space in the mind, space in the spirit for something greater than what was there before. Many people misunderstand this moment because it feels like subtraction, but in truth it is preparation for addition. God removes what no longer fits so that what truly belongs can enter without obstruction. Greater assignment cannot coexist with old limitations. The habits, mindsets, and attachments that once seemed harmless can become obstacles when God is preparing to move someone into a new level of purpose. That is why the reset feels so intense. God is not only changing circumstances, He is expanding capacity, making room for more responsibility, more influence, and deeper impact. What God is preparing is often larger than personal comfort. A greater assignment usually requires greater faith, greater discipline, and greater surrender. It demands a heart that is no longer divided, a mind that is no longer trapped by fear, and a spirit that is no longer dependent on approval. The reset clears away distractions so focus can be restored. It removes lesser priorities so greater purpose can take its rightful place. Many people ask God for new beginnings while holding tightly to old versions of themselves. But a new beginning requires a new posture. Cannot step into what God is preparing while clinging to what He has already finished. The reset forces release, not to punish, but to free. Freedom is necessary because the next season will require movement, flexibility, and obedience without hesitation. Making room is not only external, it is deeply internal. God addresses beliefs that limit growth, challenges narratives formed by past failures, disappointments, and wounds. Those internal barriers must be removed because they would sabotage the new beginning before it fully begins. God heals what would otherwise break under the weight of blessing. A greater assignment also requires clarity of identity. When identity is rooted in God rather than circumstances, stability becomes possible. The reset strips away false identities built on success, relationships, or recognition. What remains is a clearer understanding of who you are and why you were created. That clarity becomes a compass in the new season. New beginnings are often quiet at first. They do not always arrive with dramatic change. Sometimes they begin with small steps, renewed habits, or subtle shifts in direction. God values foundation over spectacle. He ensures that what begins will last. The reset prepares the ground so the new beginning can take root deeply rather than fade quickly. Fear often tries to speak loudest at the threshold of a new beginning. Fear of failure, fear of repeating past mistakes, fear of the unknown. But fear loses its power when the heart is aligned with God. The reset teaches trust before movement, builds confidence in God's faithfulness rather than in personal ability. That confidence is what allows bold steps forward. A greater assignment is not about personal elevation alone. It is about service, influence, and purpose beyond self. God prepares people to carry what will bless others. The reset refines motives so the assignment is carried with humility rather than pride, ensures that success does not replace devotion, and that impact does not overshadow obedience. New beginnings come with new responsibilities. God does not reveal everything at once. He releases direction step by step, ensuring dependence remains constant. The reset teaches patience so guidance is followed carefully rather than rushed. Patience protects the assignment from being misused or misunderstood. What God is making room for will align with His character. It will bring peace, not chaos. It will require effort, but not destruction. It will stretch faith, but not break identity. The reset ensures readiness so the new beginning is received with wisdom and stewardship. When the reset is complete, life does not return to what it was. It moves forward into what it was meant to be. The past no longer defines direction. Lessons replace regrets. Hope replaces fear. Strength replaces uncertainty. God never resets a life without intention. Every clearing leads to growth. Every ending leads to beginning. What is coming will require the space God has created. Trust is often the final and hardest work God does during a reset. After loss has occurred, after the heart has been realigned, after resistance has been broken, after waiting has shaped character, and after space has been created for something greater, There remains one essential requirement: the courage to move forward in faith without complete certainty. God does not reset a life merely to bring understanding. He resets it to bring movement. But movement requires trust. At this stage, many people feel ready but still hesitant. They sense change coming, yet fear whispers reminders of past failures and unanswered prayers. The mind wants guarantees. The heart wants assurance that nothing will go wrong this time. But faith is not built on guarantees, built on confidence in God's nature. God does not promise a path without challenges. He promises His presence through them. Walking forward after a reset requires releasing the need to fully understand the plan. God rarely reveals the entire picture at once. Fear or pride would interfere. Instead, He gives light for the next step. Trust is choosing to step even when the road ahead is partially hidden. Obedience in this moment is not emotional, it is intentional. It is a decision to believe that God's guidance is sufficient. Many people miss what God prepared because they hesitate too long at the threshold. They overanalyze, replaying old mistakes and imagining future problems that have not yet happened. But God does not ask His people to predict outcomes. He asks them to follow. Delay born from fear can quietly replace faith if not confronted. Trust is not the absence of fear, it is movement despite it. God strengthens trust by reminding His people of what He has already done. Reflection becomes fuel for faith. When you remember how He sustained you in previous seasons, how He provided when resources were limited, how He guided you when direction was unclear, confidence begins to rise. The reset has already proven that God is active in your life. Trust is acknowledging that evidence and responding to it. Moving forward in faith also requires humility. Pride demands control and explanation. Humility accepts guidance without insisting on understanding. God leads humble hearts because they remain teachable. A reset removes self-reliance so divine direction can be followed without resistance. Trust grows when you stop trying to lead God and start allowing God to lead you. Obedience after a reset often feels unfamiliar because it leads into new territory. Old strategies may no longer apply. Old routines may no longer work. That discomfort is not a sign of error. It is confirmation of transition. God is doing something new, and new things require new dependence. Trust becomes the bridge between preparation and fulfillment. Faith-filled movement also brings clarity. Many wait for clarity before they act, but God often provides clarity after obedience. Direction sharpens as steps are taken. Confidence increases as faith is exercised. Peace follows obedience, not hesitation. When you move in trust, God meets you in motion. Trust also involves patience with progress. Forward movement does not always mean immediate results. Growth can be gradual. Impact can be quiet. God values faithfulness over speed. Trust keeps you steady when progress feels slow and encourages consistency when excitement fades. Those who trust God remain grounded even when outcomes take time to unfold. Walking forward requires releasing comparisons. What God is doing in your life will not look like what He is doing in someone else's. Comparison creates pressure and insecurity. Trust creates freedom. When you trust God's plan, you no longer measure success by timelines or appearances. You measure it by obedience. As trust deepens, peace replaces anxiety. This peace is not tied to circumstances, but to assurance. Assurance that God is guiding. assurance that nothing ahead is accidental, assurance that even mistakes will be redeemed. Trust anchors the heart when uncertainty remains. God does not reset lives so people can stand still in fear. He resets them so they can walk forward with purpose. Every step taken in faith strengthens spiritual muscles. Each act of obedience builds confidence. The journey ahead may be unknown, but it is not unguarded. God goes before those who trust Him. Moving forward after a reset is not about perfection. It is about willingness to follow, to learn, to grow, and to trust. God honors that willingness with guidance, strength, and peace. Faith is not knowing how everything will work out. Faith is knowing who holds everything together and choosing to walk forward under His direction